The South African Communist Party is tomorrow expected to lead a Venezuela solidarity emergency picket at US Embassy in Pretoria. The picket is aimed at demonstrating their stance against the US military action against Venezuela. It is expected to be joined by numerous other organizations, including COSATU, Africa for Palestine, and the South African Latin America Association. Now, SALA's Mohammed Desai joins us now in studio to talk about this picket. Mr. Desai, very good evening to you. Thanks for joining us. Welcome.
Good evening. Thank you so much for having me and for covering this important issue.
Absolutely. I mean, the fact that SACP is leading this very important demonstration at the US Embassy, just take us through the specific role that your organization is playing in terms of organizing and mobilizing for this demonstration.
The Venezuelan people, when we're speaking about them, we're not just talking about another country. We're talking about a vibrant and resilient people, a resilient nation that had forged relations with South Africa. And it's really encouraging to see the various organizations across the political spectrum, except that one organization, all other political formations coming out in condemnation of the recent US invasion of Caracas, as well as the capture of President Nicolas Maduro. We felt as civil society organizations, together with the other trade union formations, that it's important to provide a physical expression of the outrage that South Africans are currently experiencing when they see these images of the United States using its helicopters, F-16 bombers, to interfere in another country.
Maybe for context, if you could just take us through what the mandate of the organization is. Are you a political formation, or are you simply apolitical and a civil society movement?
The South Africa Latin America Association's main purpose is to forge relations between our two continents, between the countries of, between the progressive countries in Latin America, together with South Africa. We actually don't share very very far distance between ourselves. It's just an 8-hour flight between between Johannesburg, for example, and Brazil. The purpose of the organization is to highlight the various forms of sports, culture, and as well as the trade relations and possibilities that exist between South Africa and these progressive countries in Latin America.
Now, Mr. Desai, does your organization's involvement in this particular exercise stem from ideological alignment to the SACP or solidarity with the SACP, or simply just a principled opposition to interventionism?
I think that there are two things when you're talking about Venezuela. Venezuela has a very remarkable and a wonderful story that often gets clouded by the Western rhetoric that casts aspersions around Venezuela. Right. Venezuela is, of course, many people now are repeating, the country with the largest oil deposits. However, this was a country before 1990, before the election of President Hugo Chavez. This was a country that had a 70% poverty rate. More than 65% of Venezuelans before the election of Chavez could not access any form of health care. Chavez came into power and he put in place various social programs that used the profits and the revenue from the oil money that Venezuela was receiving. He redirected this revenue into social programs. And under the leadership of President Hugo Chavez and now President Nicolas Maduro, Venezuela has done tremendously well. We've seen 5 million homes being built in the last 30 years in Venezuela. We've seen adult illiteracy, which was at a staggering 1.5 million people, completely eradicated by the programs of Chavez and Maduro. And so for us, the reasons of standing in solidarity with Venezuela is, of course, being in opposition to US intervention, because today they're accusing Nicolas Maduro of being the head of a drug cartel. Tomorrow they're going to accuse President Cyril Ramaphosa of overseeing a white genocide in our country, and it will allow the US to both intervene in Latin America but also intervene in South Africa. So we are protesting and we're standing in solidarity because we believe in the Bolivarian project in Venezuela. We also opposed to the US invasion of Caracas and the capture of President Nicolas Maduro. But also we believe, Simpiwe, in a more human world.
Right.
And therefore, we stand with the South African Communist Party, with COSATU, and the various other progressive organizations in this country to reclaim that human ground. I think that South Africa on the international stage did a fantastic job when it went to the International Court of Justice. We started regaining that moral authority that we held once during the 1990s. And this standing in solidarity with the oppressed peoples is one of the main underlying reasons that we are joining tomorrow's protest, and we're inviting fellow South Africans to join us.
And just considering that your involvement or your activism is in good faith, but I suppose critics might argue that aligning with the SACP could possibly politicize our organization. So how do you respond to concerns that this could probably blur the lines between activism, solidarity, and partisan party campaigning?
Well, fortunately, the protest tomorrow is open to all organizations, and various political formations have shown interest from across the political spectrum.
Yeah.
And so we will be having speakers from various organizations. But I don't think that it's criminal, and I don't think that we should criminalize the SACP for being one of the first organizations to have come out so clearly, to have come out and to have been in solidarity with the Venezuelan people, and who have been cautioning us around the US interference in Latin America for a long time now. But I think that tomorrow's protest and tomorrow's picket is also going to be a celebration of South African civil society. And so we have, for example, artists, we have entertainers, we have sports people that will be joining us. Various South African sports people and entertainers have been traveling to Venezuela, for example, in the last 3 years now. There's been book fairs, film festivals, and other forms of connection that often our people are not aware of out there in the public. And tomorrow we're going to be displaying this whilst condemning the US invasion, but also celebrating our shared humanity.
And having said that, I just need to pick your brain on this.
Yeah.
On what international legal basis does your organization contest the US operation in Venezuela?
Well, the UN Charter Article 2 makes it very clear that every country's sovereignty and independence must be respected. So not only is the UN Charter being violated, but also all understandings of multilateralism and a multipolar world, which we've been trying to forge through the UN, but also through international institutions, all grounded, of course, in international law.
And how does your interpretation of international law compare with other global actors, in particular at the United Nations Security Council?
You know, one of the problems and one of the hypocrisies of the world is that you have these Western European countries and the United States that imposes the so-called international law on all of us in Africa and Latin America. But the United States of America is not a signatory, for example, to the International Court, to the Rome Statute, which governs the International Criminal Court. The United States has in its own legislation that if the International Criminal Court or the International Court of Justice has to ever try to take any action against the United States will use military force to bomb and to destroy the ICC and the ICJ. This is the kind of bully that we have on the international stage. It seems as if rules are imposed on one set of people and rules are a free ride for others.
And speaking of bullying, I mean, some South African political leaders, such as the ANC, have condemned the US invasion of Venezuela and warned against unilateral military intervention. So do you believe that the South African government's stance reflects public sentiment broadly, or do you think there could be, it could be driven by some political alliances of some sort?
I think that in the last 2 years, especially with the attacks on Palestine, we've seen the South African population, generally speaking, becoming far more conscientized about international issues. And therefore, I do think that when President Cyril Ramaphosa, who is the president of the party that has the largest votes in the last election, that when he does speak about Venezuela, or when he does condemn the United States for its actions, I do think that it is representative of the vast majority of our country. And I do think that, for example, tomorrow's protest, where you have COSATU with a membership of over 1.5 million members, you do have a good good representation behind our president when he speaks and behind our government when they are issuing statements at the UN. And I think that tomorrow is yet another example of how we bridge the street and the state, because tomorrow's actions are by civil society giving support to the South African government at that international stage. And of course, it's quite telling that there has been no protest in support of the United States of America's invasion of Venezuela that took place in South Africa.
Interesting that you say that. And that leads to my next question, whether you believe that protest actions and demonstrations of this nature are a very effective tools to influence foreign policy decisions, or are they mainly symbolic?
I think they're vital and crucial. Okay. I think that South African government could never speak on the international stage without being able to show that there are people on the streets putting this pressure and calling for this action to be taken. I do think, however, where you are correct is that we can't stop at simply protesting. It's also about organizing. It's also about long-term collaboration and long-term cooperative action that we want to be forging with people that we stand in solidarity with.
All right, Mohammed Desai, great chatting to you. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much.
Great stuff. Well, Mohammed Desai, we thank him for sharing the perspective of the South African Latin America Association on tomorrow's solidarity picket at the United States Embassy in Pretoria.